The Leadership Coaching Group, making personal development the foundation of leadership development.
Tori, we're back. Hi.
Hi.
I've come back to this platform and I don't think I could do it without you. So thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you back. And thank you for having me.
We kind of stumbled on this topic recently of self-care.
Yeah.
And I heard this voice in you that I haven't heard before. And it was like this powerhouse. And you were like, I know why people like don't understand this. And I was like, oh, I don't. I really think we should talk about this. So thank you for being willing to kind of take the lead in this one.
Healing has been a thing for me for the past 7 years. So when we were talking about self-care or you brought it up, there's just a fire inside of me that that gets lit. And I'm just passionate about it. When we're younger, we're always taught to take care of other people or just to live outside of ourselves. We develop this whole persona where we have to live outside of ourselves because we have to, get our teachers' approval, get our parents' approval, and all of that stuff. And when you're living outside of yourself for so long, there is no room to take care of yourself. And so the self gets neglected.
I disappeared the last 2 years because I was in absolute overwhelm, right? Mm-hmm. And not taking awesome care of myself. And it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like I'm the martyr and I'm just not going to take care. It was nothing like that, but the skill simply wasn't there. And I'm curious about, because it is a healing thing, what your take on it is. But I heard someone say, or probably knowing me, I read something and it was like, self-care is something you do today to benefit your future self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for some reason that formula clicked in my brain. I was like, oh, okay. So self-care isn't necessarily like mommy wine time or necessarily like binging Netflix, right? Because is that going to benefit my future? Maybe, right? Like maybe having the downtime of watching something is how to turn off.
It has its place. Yeah, it has its place. Yeah.
But is that really like a pattern that we want to get into, right?
Right, exactly.
So how do you describe it?
Self-care on like a soul level. It's about your soul. And I found this to be true, especially for people who are who do the work of growing and evolving. Self-care is really important to help you through those transitions. That's what I feel like. That's where self-care comes into play. You need, because when you're growing and you're challenging yourself, you're stressing your body out. It's like working out at the gym. So you're stressing yourself out. You're having all of this resistance, going through the changes because you're growing, and all of that stuff is necessary. So what are you doing to, calm yourself, nurture yourself, take care of yourself through those transitions? That's a huge part of self-care. So it's kind of like all of these intangible things that feed your soul so that it can continue to flourish and grow. Mm-hmm. So that's why like manicures and pedicures or like the surface level things aren't going to cut it because we've neglected ourselves. That's why self-care needs to be implemented, because there is a neglect for anybody who is starting their self-care journey or knows that they need it. That is the first thing that you need, is your intuition, because self-care does not look the same for everybody, but your intuition, you will be prompted, intuitively prompted to put together your own self-care regimen if you're listening to what you need.
The topic of intuition, I think, is interesting. I remember when I started working with my favorite mentor, who I still work with a little bit, she said, it's a practice of remembering and kind of like listening. And I had no idea what she meant. Like, she may as well have been speaking Greek to me when she said that. So I'm happy to share my experience, but I'm curious if you have any words about like, how do you tap in if it's a voice that you've ignored for so long and the concept of intuition even seems a little distant? Like, how do you check back in and like start to hear or remember and get to know that part of yourself?
the first way of tapping in, or that's the first way of tapping in, is curiosity, is asking questions. And like I was saying, I don't know if people have to be going through something traumatic for that to happen, because when you're going through something like that, those questions come from a really, really deep place. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, like if somebody doesn't think that they're going through something, or no red flags, or if they're not ran down or burnt out, then I don't know how they can tap into that. But it starts with questions, you know, and that really deep desire to really want to know how to get out of that situation, or how to make that situation better.
So let's talk about conditioning, because this is like a favorite topic of, well, favorite, least favorite. It's a relevant topic of mine. I feel like it's something that I think about also. It's something I want to call a favorite because it's really terrible in a lot of ways. But let's talk about what it is. So what is conditioning as you're describing it?
As I'm describing, conditioning is a mental practice of brainwashing of thoughts, of belief systems that somebody or a society can, like, you know, I don't know, infiltrate your system or whatever, and kind of set their establishment within you. And then if you hear it over and over again, you see the commercials on TV over and over again, you hear it on the radio through ads over and over, you just see it everywhere. And then that becomes, you know, your thought process. That becomes what you believe. So like I said, the whole gym thing, when you're going in to condition your muscles to grow, you have to do a certain amount of reps, you know, every time you go in. And so it's reps, it's repetition that we are exposed to over and over again. That's what I feel. What do you think? What's your definition of conditioning?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can go really textbook really fast and talk about the Pavlovian, like Pavlov's dogs, right? And how most of us probably know that study about the dogs drooling when it's interesting because most people think it's when the dogs heard a bell that they'd ring before feeding them. But my understanding is they actually heard the shoes of the person that was walking over, the click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. And that was actually their trigger point, according to some. But anyway, but they heard, so over and over, they heard a sound, a stimulus, and their response, and then they'd get food. And so when they'd hear whatever sound it was, then they'd start to drool in anticipation of the food. So they're conditioned to a sound to have a behavior as a response. And I think that is a type of conditioning. So it's a pattern where there's some kind of stimulus and response. And oftentimes it's used, and this is a heavy statement, but it's very often used as a control tactic.
Yeah.
And so then you have to ask, who does it serve? Does it serve the dogs to drool when they hear shoes or a bell? No, it served to prove this theory quite well, right? So who does it serve if we think that there's one road to success?
Right.
Whether it's within my company or, you know, society at large, who does it serve? And the fact of the matter is, people have not been particularly served by having jobs that are causing depression and obesity and all of the things that, you know, are making people very sick and very isolated and very detached from their family systems and their, you know, themselves, as we're talking about. I go deep really fast, but that's a big part of what comes up for me when I hear conditioning. So conditioning being like a learned response to some kind of input.
Right.
And then asking, who does it serve? Like, does it actually serve me?
Right.
And if not, then back to the coaching question of, what is it that you want? Where do you want to go? And is what I'm doing right now getting me closer? I had a really brilliant guy that I was working with, really, really admire him and the work that he did. And I was very clear with him, like, I feel like my work right now is helping, and this is a very technical person. I work in very technical spaces. very, academic and logic based. And I told him, typical Liz fashion, I believe right now my work is to help you learn how to dream. And he says, that's great. And totally irrelevant to me because I am bound by logic. And I said, aha, let us then be bound by logic, my friend, because there are so many examples of, I think I've told this story before, it was publicized. This group of people gathered some brilliant minds and they put them in this study of a brilliant man who had passed away that had created this anti-gravity machine. And they said, we don't have the exact, specifications about how he did everything, but we know everything that he had was in this room. You have access to everything he did. So rebuild it based on what you find here. And they stayed and they read the books that were on the shelves and they went through his files and they went through all of these things. And in an amount of time, they created something that was kind of close. And the thing is, there was no man that had created this machine. But they believed that it existed. So they were bound by the constraints of logic that it had been done and therefore it could be repeated.
Wow.
And there's so many stories so many stories like this. This is one of very many. And so what are we choosing to be bound by, and what is this logic, and why is the word, this is funny because this is what I talked about in the podcast that I just released as my coming back podcast, was people resist that word, which is sort of why I'm using it, because I think we almost have to. But when I'm talking to very, very technical folks, the resistance to the word dream is fascinating. But if I use a more technical term, and I do it with sincere intent to open their minds up a little bit, and we say we're going to architect a vision, we are going to come together and brainstorm and ideate, and these terms that they're comfortable with in a product or app development kind of place, and then it's okay. But if we say the word dream, then all of a sudden it's become fantastical or this or that, or unreasonable for ourselves. So if I say, let us then ideate for ourselves and architect the plan for our own being, all of a sudden it's an acceptable way forward.
They can hear it. They're like, huh, okay, I can do that. Yeah. The word dream will challenge you. The word dream in itself is feeling too, oh, I have to feel, being logical, thinking from your logic mind. You don't have to feel anything. If you're going to pursue a dream or even think about dreaming, the first thing that's going to come to mind is doubt, oh, I can't do that. That's never going to happen. And you don't want to feel that. A lot of people who are logical, they don't, it's safer there.
Yeah. Oh, and it is. I mean, for so many, even if you don't say I'm, the most technical. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They'll say well, this is realistic. I have bills to pay, Tori. I have, a family. This is just reality, and I have to ground in reality. Right? Right?
Yes, you're right. I have bills to pay. Who's going to pay these bills? Well, you will eventually, if you go through what you need to go through.
Yeah, they're going to make you pay them.
Pay some ramen noodles for a minute, but it's okay. That's just going to attack your pride and your ego, but that needs to go anyway. So go through it now and then get to the other side.
Right. So let's go to you, if you don't mind. And I think you gave us some pretty clear examples, but what does self-care for you look like? What would, if you're feeling like you're knee deep in some of those growing pains and it's time to just nurture and, build up a little bit, what do you personally do?
Well, I have boundaries is a big thing. And what I've learned about boundaries is it's not so much for, when we say that, oh, we need to set boundaries, we think we're setting boundaries for that person outside of us. Oh, no, you're not going to treat me this way, or you're not going to say this to me. It's, well, do you tell yourself no when something comes along? What are you protecting yourself from? What are the voices in your head that you're protecting yourself from? And it starts there. I'm not going to succumb to fear. I'm going to push past the fear. I'm not going to sit here and worry. I've taken worry out of my vocabulary. When people say, oh, don't worry about that, or we'll worry about that later. That's a real thing for me, because was a worrisome child, growing up. So now it is, oh, I'm not going to focus on that right now. Focus is in place of worry for me. But if somebody comes to me and they're in fear, or, they're speaking fear, I'm protected by it within myself. So I'm not going to listen to that or let that affect me or stump me, because there's a boundary within myself that I don't even listen to that fearful voice. So the boundaries start within yourself, and then they will be established with, outside of yourself, with people and how they treat you or what you accept and all of that stuff. So that's first and foremost that I had to learn about boundaries. Like, oh, wait a minute, because they won't stick if you're just telling them, no, you're not going to do that. And well, do you treat yourself that way? Like, how do you treat yourself?
I like what you're saying about boundaries for a lot of reasons. I heard someone recently say that boundaries don't exist for you to control other people's behaviors. They exist so that you can control your own behavior around them.
That is true. Yeah.
And I thought that was super powerful. And I was like, oh yeah. Before we sign off, what would you give as like a piece of advice to someone who is really trying to reconnect to themselves? How would you, what are the parting words you'd want to leave them with?
I think, well, I was speaking to you the other day about this, but a good analogy or a question to ask is, what kind of plant am I? What kind of tree am I? Trees, plants, they need certain kind of or a specific kind of soil. They need a certain kind of light, a certain amount of water. And we're the same way. We all don't need that one same thing. So we need a certain amount of this, a little bit of this, and all, whatever makes or nurtures and kind of pushes you along and takes care of you through the journey. So ask yourself, what kind of plant am I? And if you understand that, if you understand how to nurture yourself, you're demonstrating that to other people, and then they can, or you can align with those people that know how to nurture you in that way. And then you're showing other people, specifically your companion or your significant other, how to nurture you as well. But yeah, that's the number one question. Like, well, what kind of plant am I? What do I? If you have to research trees.
Yeah.
Systems.
Learn from the trees. That's our takeaway. And plant one too. We should.
Yeah.
A website to find you?
Yes, it's toriplayer.com.
And thank you again. It's just always so lovely to talk to you. Thank you.